One, Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies here, and another in my ongoing chats around areas of interest in the field of trauma, emotional release, and natural health and healing. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about pain, in particular chronic pain. Pain that lasts longer than 3 months generally is defined as chronic pain. And sometimes if it persists for a very long time, over a year, it can be labeled or diagnosed as fibromyalgia, which is a term which is just descriptive, really. It suggests that there are problems in the soft tissues. There's a myalgia, which is just a description of pain, really. But it is defined in a certain way that you generally have pain in the postural muscles. Those are the muscles of the head, neck, also the back, lower back is very implicated, and sometimes also around the hips, the pelvis. And this kind of pain is very different to the sort of pain that you get if you've, torn a ligament or damaged the tissue in some way, in that rest doesn't seem to help it. And that's what makes it very, very particular and very debilitating. So whether you rest or not makes no difference really to the pain. And you often have very acute sensitivity to touch as well, something we call allodynia. And so even the lightest touch is perceived by your brain as being painful. And so people who have these kind of chronic pain conditions can live a very difficult and challenging life because they can't do normal activities. They can't go out, they can't have a massage, they can't walk very far. Everything becomes a strain, and sleep is affected. And often they are given pain medications, which pregabalin is one of the most common ones given, which are sort of supposed to change the peripheral nerve stimulus to reduce pain, but largely ineffective, because, believe it or not, the problem is not in the tissue itself. Although the blood flow is obviously reduced, the energy production in the tissue is reduced, causing lactic acid buildup. So it's not that it's not a physical problem, but the origin is not in the tissue itself. The origin is in the part of the central nervous system that controls pain messages, and that's actually in your brain, and that's in the deeper parts of your brain, particularly your emotional brain or your limbic brain. And so pain meds that change your peripheral nerve stimulus don't actually seem to do very much, and can actually be quite addictive and difficult to come off. And when you do try and reduce them, actually the pain just escalates. So my message to people is that it's actually not something to deal with physically. It's actually something to look at mentally, emotionally. When I say that, obviously people get very upset because they think, how can a physical pain be caused by something mental, emotional? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that the mind and the body are not separate. We don't have a brain that is sort of housed separately to the body. It's bathed in cerebral fluid, which is fed from the blood supply. And basically anything that happens in the body is communicated via the fluids that bathe the brain to the brain. There are also other mechanisms. There are small proteins that kind of are produced in the gut that can travel up. There are microbes that can produce different chemicals that travel up into the brain and pass the blood-brain barrier, which is something that is meant to protect the brain. It's a variable, permeable membrane, however, and things can travel up. Obviously, there's the whole energetic component of the human being, which is completely missed out in modern medicine. But we are basically energy as well as matter. And so if you're in a low state, your low vibrational state, you're feeling despair or hopeless, it's actually what's going to keep things going. So pain is in the brain, and pain is also a habit. It's something that the brain gets used to and regards as normal. It gets habituated, in other words, to certain levels of stimulus, which it misinterprets as pain. Now, how does that come about? Well, usually the pain message comes in from past experiences that haven't been metabolized as over. Things that have happened to you that overwhelmed you get stored in your limbic brain as a sort of implicit memory. And that implicit memory of overwhelm can be re-triggered in the life and actually come about to make you feel overwhelmed again quite easily. But because it's an unconscious part of your brain and the stimulus is unconscious as well, this trigger from the past is an unconscious awareness. It's unconscious in the sense of your front brain isn't aware of it at all. You may be triggered in ways that you're not aware of and you don't have any control over. It could be the time of year, or it could be the way someone looks at you, or it could be the voice of somebody, or an email, or a letter that arrives, or a bill that turns up. These stimuli are everywhere in modern life. We're in very stressful times right now, so it's very easy to be triggered. But this idea that the brain is kind of on alert, that it's been sensitized to your situation from past experience that hasn't been metabolized, past experience in your childhood particularly, and even in your earliest experiences of birth and those early few weeks and months of your life. This is a new understanding that we didn't have before. And how it relates to pain is that it sensitizes your nervous system to threat. And so threat becomes everywhere, and threat becomes your normal, if you like. And so instead of responding to stimuli in a way that allows your nervous system to adjust, it actually triggers a set of reactions which cause a sort of inflammatory response in your nerves and in all the communication systems in your body. And so nerves are very interesting because they're very high energy, actually. They need a lot of energy to run. They're full of mitochondria in your neurons. And they're not just in your brain. Neurons are present in your heart, actually. Sensory neurites have been discovered in the last 10, 12 years. And so it will affect your heart rate, your heart rhythm. It also affects how well your heart pumps, so your blood pressure. They're also in your gut because they affect digestion. I've talked about that in a separate video about the gut innervation, which is similar to the size of a cat's brain. So it's actually huge. And nerves penetrate virtually everywhere in your body as well, in your bladder, your lungs, your kidneys, your liver, and so on. And it's actually a part of your nervous system that links with your brain. It's called the autonomic, or some people think of it as a sort of automatic system that goes on behind the scenes without your awareness. And it's constantly filtering information from your environment and transmitting messages of either threat or safety. And now, as I've said, if from your earliest experiences you were ever overwhelmed without support, and that's a very common experience with many of us if we had a difficult birth, or some experience in our early life where we didn't bond well with the mother or caregiver, or we had experiences of being isolated in some way, whether in ICU or even during, chronic illness or hospitalization, dental surgery. There are so many ways in which we can have this experience that overwhelms us, and it's the sense of having nobody there to hold that for us and to literally communicate with us that we're safe. And so we don't learn that we're safe in our body. If we're not safe in our body, whenever something comes along in the current life, in the adult life, we've got this map of the world which says, I am unsafe and I'm under threat constantly. And pain is the inevitable result. Now, why pain and not, say, fatigue? Because many people don't have so much pain, they have more a fatigue scenario. And what I have found is it depends on the nature of the emotion that they're not dealing with, that they've repressed. And that's part of my PhD, actually, was to look at what emotions have been repressed and how that plays out in the kind of symptoms that you express. And the pattern I've identified is that it's largely rage or anger, suppressed rage or anger, that causes body pain, this kind of chronic, unrelenting body pain. And so I would ask you to look gently at your experience of life, and where in your life is there unexpressed rage or anger? Often it's a childlike response, because children do feel rage when they understand that the world is no longer revolving around them. We call it the terrible twos. When they're beginning to individuate as people who, you know, notice that not all their needs get met all the time. And so there's a certain degree of rage that is natural and normal. But what if your parent, for whatever reason, is not attentive in the way that you need, or doesn't really understand you in the way that you need, or humiliates you, or criticizes you, or just isn't there for you emotionally, is emotionally absent for whatever reason, maybe their own depression, maybe a bereavement, or their own childhoods haven't been resolved, and so they're unable to give you what you biologically are wired to need, which is a soothing, comforting, attuned other, and actually we call it attunement. If that doesn't happen, then there's a certain degree of rage that wells in all of us, because we want to be heard and felt and seen by those around us that we depend on for survival. It's an ancient system that's designed to keep us attached to people who will keep us bodily safe, because when we're very young, we have no ability to look after ourselves. You know, as human beings, we're born very immature. So it's actually a biological problem that has become more and more difficult and more problematic in the culture we live in now, where you are raised generally not by a tribe, not by a group of people, not by an extended family. Although obviously I know, you know, if possible, grandparents do get involved. If you look back in history, this is probably the, you know, the last 200 years have been the time when we have separated out raising a child into nuclear families instead of by a community. And so the child is very much more dependent on the quality of parenting that they get from parents who've maybe had similar deficits in their own childhoods. And so we are perpetuating this trauma, and rage and anger is an inevitable result of disconnection, a disconnection from love and support in the places that we absolutely need it. And that's, you know, in our upbringing, in our childhoods. And we're seeing, of course, a huge disconnection now in our culture generally because of what's happening in the world with the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, which has been one of a warlike footing. We're on warlike footing against a virus that we can't see. We can't even prove it exists. We haven't isolated it yet. We just know the results of it, and maybe some fragments of DNA. So we are at war with something that we can't identify very easily, and that puts us in existential threat, actually, a constant sense of threat against something. And because of the way we have formulated our battle, and we've said that we have to isolate each other from each other, we have to go into either some sort of lockdown, or we have to mask, or we have to keep social distancing, which is very antithetical to how we are wired to behave, to connect. We are in a constant state of stress, actually, all of us. And so our bodies are naturally responding to this with rage, with a sense of despair in some people. And so we're seeing a huge rise in pain, in anxiety, in depression. Mental health problems are massive, particularly in our children and our adolescents. And an opioid crisis as people try and relieve pain and then get addicted to the very drugs that are supposed to relieve it. So that's what's going on. And in order to solve this issue, there isn't a pill for rage. They haven't come up with one yet. I doubt if they will. We have to look within at the real root cause of what's making us so angry, but in a very ancient kind of primal way. We may not even be aware that we're angry. We may be so dissociated from our experience and our rage that we may deny it completely. And that was certainly what I found when I did my research, that there were people that were aware of it, but they were a particular attachment style that were more vocal in their neediness, if you like. They would notice where their emotions were and certainly feel it. And sometimes their rage was almost out of control. But more likely it was the people that repressed their feelings and weren't aware of it and were very kind of what I call left brain oriented or cognitively, intellectually aware, but not emotionally heart-based aware. And so they were often in spaces where they would say things like, now, my childhood was brilliant. There were no problems in my childhood. My parents were angels, or they were wonderful people, are wonderful people. You know, we have this excellent relationship, which I don't deny is a great thing, but it's not realistic to say that your childhood was perfect. No childhood is perfect. No childhood really is without pain or rage or some form of growth that enables a challenge. Emotionally, you cannot have growth without a challenge. You cannot learn without hearing the words no. You know, you need to find within yourself the resources to overcome your challenges. You need to be able to metabolize your emotions as that happens. That's a normal developmental stage. And so to say you haven't got any pain or any anger or any unresolved emotions from your childhood isn't realistic. And so my approach is always to look at what is dissociated, what is pushed away, what is denied in that person. And so that's often a common trait of people who end up with pain, is that they're in denial of some of the things they've experienced. Even when we look at their histories, we can see very strong patterns of maybe being forced to be people that they weren't naturally, or having high expectations of themselves given to them by parents, well-meaning parents who did the best they could, by the way. We're not blaming parents. They were children too once. And so it becomes a sort of a common repression of reality of how you feel. And so you go into adult life believing that everything's okay as long as you keep moving, as long as you keep active, as long as you keep achieving things. And so you become quite driven. And that kind of A-type personality is another very common feature. And so what we'd have to do is we have to somehow soothe and reach the part of the brain, this emotional brain. And to do that, we sometimes have to disconnect a little bit the critical, intellectual brain, the one that's based in our cortex, the thinking brain, so that we can get beneath, that we can go beneath into the parts of you that do feel things, that do really have a strong need for something that was never met, or the need was never met consistently in some way. And there are many ways of doing that. There are ways that involve psychedelic therapies. That's just coming in. There are ways that involve touch, which is what I use, self-touch, havening, tapping, or EFT. Ways that use eye movements in terms of eye movement desensitization, or schema therapy. That's another one that uses eye movements. And there are others that use audio or heart rate variability regulation. So you can actually use sound or breath to re-regulate the nervous system, because the nervous system, remember, is your interface. So if you're feeling constantly under threat, your nervous system is wired. It's wired all the time. It's totally exhausting, and it reduces the available energy for rest and digest, for natural functions like digestion and feeling joy and so on. So we do have a problem, but we do have solutions. And if any of you are interested, these solutions actually work very fast. They work much more quickly than talk therapy, which seeks to look at your thinking processes. I look at working through the body, so your feeling processes. And I manage to get pain reduction usually within 6 sessions. So that's a lot faster than talk therapies if they work at all, and it's certainly more effective than drug therapies, which are largely useless, to be fair. So if any of you are interested, get in touch. Any comments, please, I'm very happy to receive them. So take care for now. Bye.